Brothers, from time to time we see images that awaken us from our state of oblivion, from our state of being consumed by the luxuries and comforts of this world. Perhaps some of these images awaken our conscience as well. Perhaps some of these images shake us to our very core and say to us, "What are you doing? What are we doing?" In the last few days, we saw images of Muslim refugees dying, either in crowded containers or drowning, little children drowning. They didn't just wake our conscience, but they awoke the conscience of many people. To the extent that in one European country, 11,000 families have opened their homes and are insisting on their government to take some of the Syrian refugees. What are we doing, my dear brothers? We see the images of the children drowning and others dying, and their only crime is that they responded to the advice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where He says to those who are being oppressed, "The earth is vast, migrate therein." The earth is vast. Leave the land of oppression so you can find freedom from persecution. That was their crime. And it took very tragic death for the world community to notice. We see these images repeating themselves from time to time. The tragedies of this week were not the only tragedies. If you follow the plight of refugees, most of whom in the last 20 years or so have been Muslim refugees, if you follow their plight, there's a lot of misery, a lot of unnecessary death. Our brothers, our sisters and our children are dying unnecessarily because of a number of factors that start with intervention in those countries and end up in despotic regimes and people fleeing those regimes, and then first world countries closing their borders. Well, we are living in first world countries. We are part of this international community that has closed its borders. Our nation was one of the nations that intervened in those countries. Our nation is one of the causes that led to the regimes that we see in those countries. Yet we close our borders. We close our borders to people fleeing in desperation, looking to save their lives. And there is no difference between those people and between us. They are not any less human than we are. But our government, or successive governments now, not just the current government, and governments in many Western countries, have managed to lead a fear campaign to make their population afraid of Muslim refugees. And not only of Muslim refugees, but of Muslim citizens. The campaign has reached such a terrible low that today they're introducing bills into Parliament to take away citizenship from people, even for some innocent activities. Under the fear of Islam and fear of terrorism, and trying to give the impression to the rest of the population that these laws are to protect them from Muslims. And where are we when this is happening, my dear brothers? Where are we and where is our role in society when all this is happening around us? In addition to the images of young people fleeing and dying, we have stories from the camps that our country has established offshore. They've established outside of Australia to take refugees who come here. Stories of women being raped in those camps, of brothers being beaten to death. And we even have stories of some of those people who were allowed to come into Australia and they married in Australia, being taken from the lap of their husband, like one particular lady, and put in a detention camp and threatened with being deported back to the country that she ran away from. The rest of Australian society, there's a lot of voices that oppose this, but a lot of people are afraid. Because the victims of this oppression are Muslim, a lot of people turn a blind eye because they're afraid. So what are we doing, my dear brothers? Where is our role in all this? Are we truly being effective? It's not enough to eat, to work and to sleep, and to get married and to have children. What are you doing to protect the future of your children? What are you doing to protect your long-term safety? Where are we in the decision-making positions? There are decision-making positions in the bureaucracy. There are decision-making positions in government. There are decision-making positions in being advisors to people in government. Where are our children with respect to those positions? Why aren't we encouraging enough of our children to get in there and be a good, positive, constructive influence? When a government introduces laws like the one I mentioned, these laws of fear, politics of fear, are a betrayal of the interest of their nation. But these politics of fear are generally used to gain popularity. We don't have anyone in there to speak up. No one. There may be some Muslims in the parliament, but they're not Muslims who grew up with our concerns, who can actually stand up and speak and say, stop using Muslims as a scapegoat. Stop using Muslims as a political tool. Where are we? My dear brothers, we need to make some sacrifices. We need to make some sacrifices. As we come close to the festival of sacrifice, to Eid al-Adha, and remember the sacrifices that Prophet Ibrahim was willing to make. Are we making some sacrifices to make sure that we teach our children the importance of being in those decision-making positions? That they take the risk and run for parliament. Take the risk so you can be in a position where you can encourage decency in society. And encourage fairness and encourage justice. There's no escape. We can't say this is the system of unbelievers, etc., etc. If you choose to live here, you have to participate for the interest of society, for your own interest, for your children's interest, and for the interest of the whole society. But go in there as somebody who's a staunch Muslim, somebody who has faith, and somebody who wants to do the right thing. So many changes are being made around us that affect so many aspects of our lives. The data retention laws, the surveillance laws, that they can put cameras in your house without you even knowing, in any part of your house. Any part of your house. To see and listen and hear everything that you're doing. Where are we? It's not enough for some of our speakers to make noise in the media. It's not enough. We need to be part of the decision-making process. We need to be in there. We need to be able to argue and say, no, this is not acceptable. We need to have a stronger presence in the media. We need to start to think about being more effective. Each and every one of us can become more effective. Even if the least you can do is have a meeting with your local member every few weeks. And air your concerns very strongly. Until you are able to promote your children to these positions. We need to do this, my dear brothers. Our faith is a target. And we have become a target, a very big target. You can see that they've made so many people afraid of us. Yet everywhere we go, every country we go, we bring goodness. Every one of us here who has a job, you are contributing to the betterment of this country. Don't let anyone else make you think differently. And when you talk to people about the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are bringing salvation to these people. You are bringing goodness to them. You are bringing peace into their lives. And you are motivated by your love to save people. The love that comes from the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But nobody, and remember this very well, nobody, not a woman, not your neighbour, nobody accepts love from someone they consider to be weaker than they are. If they see you as being weaker than they are, then your love is a sign of weakness. It's unimportant to them. Your love must come with the dignity that you are an equal. An equal who cares for his fellow human beings. Not a lesser being. A fellow human being who cares for others. And the only way you're going to get to that position is to be effective. To have a role in the decision making and in the opinion making places. Society is made up of many different sections. There are sections that influence opinion and there are sections that make decisions. And we seem to be the community that is absent in these sections. Or many parts of these sections. Why, when our religion requires us to be effective wherever we go? Our religion requires us to be effective. My dear brothers, does not mean that every single person has to do this. But we need to start to think consciously about doing this. About motivating our children, motivating others who seem to show the aptitude within our community. It might be a brother or the son of a brother or anybody who seems to have some aptitude about making a difference, about improving life for all around us. My dear brothers, it is not just about the policy of refugees or the policy about citizenship. There are many other things. But on the policy, back to the policy of refugees. These people, these refugees, are fleeing a part of the world where there's a lot of confusion. Militias and different groups and different factions and Muslims killing fellow Muslims and nobody really understanding what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. Or very few people understand what they're doing and why they're doing what they are doing. This is a fitna. It's a tribulation and the confusion that our Prophet ﷺ warned us against. He said, the day will come when you will have these confusing tribulations. When that day comes, the person sitting is better than the person standing. And the person standing is better than the person walking. And the person walking is better than the person running. And if you get to that time, it's better for you to be a victim and get killed than to be the killer. If you get to that time, listen to this very, very dire word of warning. If you get to that time, it's better that you let yourself get killed than to be killing another person. This is the same Prophet ﷺ who said to support the oppressed, to stand up for those who are oppressed. And he tells you that there'll be a time when there's this confusing tribulation, where it's better to be the victim than to be killing someone or hurting someone else. And these refugees have fled for this very reason. They listened to the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who said the earth is big enough for you to leave the oppression. But we find ourselves in a situation where again Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us words so that we can relate them to something that happened in our past. When Prophet Musa and Prophet Harun were talking to Pharaoh and his people to save the Israelites, the children of Israel, to save them from the oppression and from the slavery, what did Pharaoh stand up and say? Pharaoh and his elites, they stood up and said that these people are going to change your exemplary lifestyle. They're going to change the way you live your life. Just like now, you hear people saying, oh, they're going to introduce Sharia, and none of them understands what Sharia is. They're frightening people with something they don't even understand. And we're not in those positions where we can explain it properly to people. We are missing from all the positions where we can explain it properly to people. So, my dear brothers, our Prophet ﷺ told us to help the oppressed, but told us to avoid these confusing tribulations. We should not blame anyone who flees from there. Anyone who does not want to be there, who does not want to be part of the militias or any of those fighting groups. And our Prophet ﷺ told us that if we let down a fellow Muslim, where they are being oppressed, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow us to be let down as well. We will be let down at a time where we really need help. So we should never let them down. We have to start being effective. We have to make representations. Write a letter. Arrange a meeting. Write a letter to your local member and say, I want a more humanitarian refugee policy. I want to stop the scapegoating of Muslims. Next time you have any event or any gathering, invite them to attend. Go and meet them in their office. Talk to them. Everything starts with one simple step. Other societies have lobby groups that do this. Other sections of Australian society have lobby groups that do this on a regular basis. Not only do they have advisors working in the offices of many of the ministers, but they have regular meetings with their local member, and they have regular meetings with senior journalists. And they spend time and effort to explain their point of view. And they spend their own money to host them, to pay for their lunch or for their dinner or for their breakfast. And they develop friendships. And they win their trust. Where are we? Where are we where the word faith, iman, in Islam comes or includes trust? The word iman, the same three letters that make the word amana, trust, or amin, trustworthy. Where our Prophet ﷺ was referred to or nicknamed the trustworthy and the truthful person, the trustworthy person. Our role model is a symbol of trust. Whose trust have we gained? My dear brothers, we can all do this. We can all have a role to play. And we really need to start thinking very seriously about sparing some time for this. Not everybody needs to be the leader of an organisation. Not everybody needs to be in a very high position. You don't need to be. You can play your role no matter what your position is. You can have a very, very effective role no matter where you are. Start with sincerity that you want to make a positive difference. You want to be a force for good. You want goodness not only for the victims but for your society as well. And you're not weak. You're not weak because you are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you are confident that you are with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you're not weak. So nobody is better than you are. Nobody. Trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and start to do something. There was a Muslim poet of Palestinian origin. who left his land and went to Egypt under the Nasser regime. And his poetry was very political. And Nasser put him in prison for 7 years for his poetry. Imagine a poet being in prison for 7 years, real oppression. And then when he left the prison, a Muslim country invited him to teach at one of its universities and became a teacher, a professor in that university. In his poem, he's got a poem that I really like called Victim of Desire. And it's as if that poem describes the condition of our community. In one line of that poem, he says, You inherited a legacy whose value you don't really understand. We inherited a great legacy, my dear brothers. Our legacy not only excelled spiritually and continues to excel spiritually, but excelled in every field of science, including the science of politics. Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah, or introduction to the social sciences that he wrote, is still studied to this day as a political model. And this was written hundreds of years ago by a Muslim. We have a legacy, but we don't appreciate the value of that legacy, as this line says. And he said, and a crown was put on your head for which you are too small. We have become too small for the crown that was placed on our head. It's about time we stepped up and we grew into that crown that was given to us. The legacy of our ancestors that was inspired by the Quran and the Sunnah. About time we grew into that legacy and showed exactly where we descend from. My dear brothers, it's not strange that our brothers and sisters are leaving for safety and trying to take their children. When the oppression was strong and hard against the Muslims in Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ sent some of them to Abyssinia to find protection under the Negus, because the Negus was a just Christian ruler. He said, this is a just ruler. Nobody is oppressed under his reign. And the Muslims went, some Muslims went, the ones that the Prophet ﷺ sent, and they lived under the government of that Christian ruler. And when there was a rebellion against him, they stood by his side and defended him against the rebellion. And when the Muslims migrated to Medina, what happened? We started to mark our calendar on the migration of the Muslims from Mecca to Medina. But do we really appreciate the beauty of what happened with that migration? That the people of Medina immediately accepted the advice of the Prophet ﷺ and became brothers with the migrants. They opened their houses for the migrants. They shared their wealth with the migrants. And by that spirit of generosity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed Medina and blessed the people of Medina and blessed that generation, that they became beacons of light for all humanity. Beacons of light from their acts of kindness and compassion and from following the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. My dear brothers, let's turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In His hands are the keys to all goodness. Allahumma